Coming up next on Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, is it safe to buy an SSD? Samsung keylogger, oops, budget PC expectations, and next-gen motherboard technology. Coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 113, recorded March 31st, 2011. Let's move to Kansas City.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by MailRoute. Businesses of every size use MailRoute. One user, 50,000 users, it doesn't matter. MailRoute will protect you from spam and viruses, simplify your life, and make your email usable again. Visit mailroute.info for more details.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, joined as always by the man, the myth, the benchmarking legend from, for a change, Las Vegas, Nevada. How's it going, man?
It's going pretty well, enjoying the 80-something degree weather for once. It's apparently 29 degrees, and it was snowing earlier today at home, so I'm enjoying the time in the heat. Although I'm a little disappointed I didn't bring a very heavy coat with me, so the return could be a little less than appealing, I guess.
You mentioned before the show that your wife wasn't actually traveling with you. She's back in Ohio in the 29-degree weather. I think it's wonderful that your relation is sound enough that you assume you'll actually be allowed back in Ohio, coach or not.
Well, if the door locks have changed, you know, there's lots of hotels around and that kind of stuff. So, you know, and hey, I could always go back. Right, I could always go back to the warm weather.
You can sleep amidst the monitors. Monitors keep a the test room warm. I
do have the office.
Not a huge week in hardware. Big week for Kansas City.
Not really.
Kansas City's getting Google's fiber program.
It's a good time to move there.
Yeah. Well, late 2011 will almost be a good time to move there. First quarter 2012. If you haven't been following this, Google made a call out last year for Siri. Basically, they want to do an experiment. They want to lay, they want to do micro trenching and fancy new. Basically, they want to do fiber to the curb to every house in a city between 50,000 and 500,000 people. And they were supposed to announce it like back in November, December. They hired the man who's running the program. They had to delay it because they had like 1,100 entries. And just this week, Kansas City, Kansas is announced as they are getting Google's fiber. Google says it will be competitively priced. It'll be a gigabit speed for everyone, which makes me excited on levels that I can't really explain, but not nearly as excited as the idea of Comcast and AT&T having a big, giant, well-funded, free economy competitor that's going to cause everybody to drive, hopefully either drives quality of service up or drive the caps away, or just I want an alternative for everyone.
Is that the main goal of this kind of initiative, right? So the first thing I think of is what makes Kansas City so great. Why don't they bring it to Cincinnati, Ohio? It's more of a jealousy factor.
I was going to say, well, first of all, and I'm going to get slapped by my uncle for saying this, but I'm going to say Kansas City has the edge in barbecue. No disrespect.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I got no problem with that. But I just want the edge and broadband speed. And my local internet, cable internet, 50 megs down, 5 megs up is the top speed you can get. That's pretty good, and it's better than most people have access to. It's $100 a month, so it's a little bit pricey. But again, I think kind of in range with what people are having here. Now, I think they were initially going to do multiple cities. Is this just something over time, and this just happens to be the first major one they're going to do?
They did I want to say they did like 850 homes in Palo Alto, which is very close to Google headquarters, and obviously right next to the Stanford campus where Google was born for all intents and purposes. And Kansas City is the big trial rollout, and the suggestion is that yes, they want to roll it out in more cities. And I think they're basically, Google's got a lot of money in the war chest.
Sure.
They've got a, okay, hey, we've invented cars that drive themselves in some of the worst traffic in North America. Why not wire up a city, and let's see what happens next. Because, Google, when you think about it, right, part of the reason when people talk about the whole like the free market will take care of itself, where it's very unusual because at the same time all the baby bells are being, or the Ma Bell was being broken up into the baby bells, cable companies were buying up more cable companies and wiring up private networks. And that's where all, it's funny because like DSL uses phone lines which were installed under protective monopoly, and the court fights go through, and then you can actually have DSL provided by somebody other than your regional carrier, right?
Right.
The same battle went to the Supreme Court because people wanted access to deliver competitive cable, like internet over the cable lines, and the cable companies basically are like, we're private companies, we didn't have a protected monopoly, y'all can't have it. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. So the idea that somebody's going to wire every house, and it's everybody's like, well, Fios, and I'm like, Fios is in like 8 households. No disrespect, Fios. Everybody who has Fios thinks it is the most amazing thing ever. I desperately want Fios.
It might be, yeah.
But it takes an incredible amount of money to lay cable, or I should say, lay fiber in the traditional way. So Google's big experiment that they're doing what other companies have done, which is figuring out the least painful and least expensive way to lay a whole lot of fiber to a whole lot of houses really fast. And I think the biggest thing that Kansas City had going for it was that they had a huge response from the community along with the government. And it wasn't just like, we'll change the name of Kansas City to Google Kansas. It was, people making really serious responses and having a large turnout from the community.
Right. It's interesting because my dad, I just bought him a high-definition TV for the first time this past Christmas. So he's seeing things like HDTV for the first time, really has fallen in love with it. Now he's already the guy that if it's not on an HD, he's just going to change the channel. And so when I talked to him about, we talk about broadband speeds, internet speeds, what can enabling a gigabit Ethernet connection for a community, for a city actually do? You try to, like, while we're driving around here, Las Vegas, going to golf courses, and through my single cell phone, we're doing GPS, and, I'm using it as mobile broadband to make show notes for today's show, and, I'm getting text messages on it, stuff like that. That's really impressive, and it's all enabled by bandwidth and processing horsepower. And as we've seen in this show, processing horsepower, GPU horsepower, this type of stuff has trucked on over the years. It's incredibly efficient. It's incredibly powerful. Broadband speeds, while we have been increasing, we're talking, less than an order of magnitude if we look at the whole country that it has changed versus how many orders of magnitude performance has changed in the same period of time. Right. And if you really want to, we start looking at, well, is this laptop good enough? Is this computer good enough for all the things I want to do? Enabling gigabit Ethernet speeds and enabling what Google's calling these gigabit Ethernet applications, what they'll be able to do, what new people will be able to create, is kind of required in order to think of new ways to use this type of processing power in your laptop or in your desktop. It's pretty interesting. And also I saw on this blog post here that Google posted that they heard from some communities that they were disappointed not to have been selected in our initial build. And they're saying that this is the beginning of the project. At the end of the project, over the coming months, they'll be talking about more cities that are interested in that. So maybe your city, maybe my city, hopefully some city near us.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it's a huge experiment. It's probably could potentially cost hundreds of millions of dollars for Google. Google's making money hand over fist, so that I don't think it's as big an issue for them. But I'm right along with you. I want to see what happens if you have an entire community with giant amounts of bandwidth.
I would tend to say that one is not enough.
Bandwidth. Yeah,
I mean, one community is not enough.
Alameda would be a fine. Yeah, you went Cincinnati. I went Alameda. What town would you like?
Oh, Petaluma's fine.
Yeah, Petaluma's fine. The list. Yeah, by the time Kansas City gets up and running and people start talking about the bandwidth, there'll be like 50,000 cities in North America that want this.
Right.
So we should probably talk about Intel's 320 series, the new SSDs.
Yeah, last week or a couple of weeks ago, maybe as much as a month ago, Intel released the 510 series of SSD, and this was the first kind of major change from the X25M lineup of SSDs. We had the X25M and the X25M G2, which basically increased read speed and write speed a little bit on both sides. The 510 series introduced a SATA 6 6G controller capability. You know, read speeds up to 510 megabytes, write speeds up to, I don't know, 350, 400 megabytes, something like that. But it wasn't using an Intel controller, if you remember. We thought that was kind of weird. It was actually using a Marvell branded and developed controller. So this time around, we're reverting back to the SATA 3.0 gigabit per second bus. These are not SATA 6G SSDs, but they are using the same, or they're using a newer, faster Intel controller in them. With that, we are getting improved sustained sequential reads and writes, as well as improved random reads and writes. And actually, Intel is saying that across the board, compared to the X25M, the 320 series of SSDs sees performance boosts at every single statistic. Wow. And drops the price by, I think, $100 at the 160 gig iteration. You know, read speeds are at 270 megabytes per second, basically from the 80 gig model up to the brand new will be available, the 600 gig model. That's always nice. And then write speeds actually improve as the capacity of the drive improves, all the way up to, you know, 200 megabytes per second at the 300 gigabyte model, 220 megabytes per second at the 600 gig model. Now, those are less than you're going to, you know, you're basically kind of maxing out the SATA 3.0 gigabit per second bus there with those types of speeds. And you know, there were some questions on why would Intel decide to do that. I think likely it is that their controller technology just wasn't up to the task of being ready for the SATA 6G bus, hence why they would use that Marvell controller. Their answer is basically that, hey, look, you know, 80% of the market, 90% of the market is still limited to SATA 3.0 gigabit per second connections anyway. Why spend extra money, extra development time, improving in an area that most users won't actually see an advantage of in terms of that performance? And so there's some merit to that. And I think for the most part, I would go under the guise of saying that 3.0 gigabit per second speeds are just fine for consumers today. Right. What is most important with SSDs is that latency, is that response time. You know, you're getting the 0.1, 0.2 millisecond response time, as opposed to needing to get more than 200 megabytes per second of reads or writes. There aren't a lot of instances where that's going to happen. I mean, can you think of anything that you do on a semi-normal basis that requires 200 to 250 megs of read or write bandwidth?
No, not unless I start running a massive server system out of my home, and I'm pretty sure streaming HD video to 3 devices in the house isn't gonna do it.
No, probably not. I mean, if you do like hardcore video editing, you're doing like raw video, 1080p, super high bit rate, you know, the higher read speeds are going to be great, but I still think 270 is going to be more than enough for that. Prices on this are going to be pretty good too. We're talking less than $1.80 per gigabyte. So you could be able to get the 160 gig model of this drive for $289, which is a really reasonable price. I think the sweet spot for you know, the kind of the enthusiast people, the guys who are listening to this show, it's going to be a 300 gig model that's $529. And I'm guessing by the time we kind of see stock settle in and that kind of stuff, we'll see this right at about the $500 mark for 300 gigs, which is pretty good. And if you really want to, you can get that 600 gig model for about $1,000. It's pretty impressive.
I want it, but then I won't be allowed back in Alameda.
Just like I won't be allowed back in Florence. So, but I mean, it's an interesting kind of, it's an evolutionary step, and I kind of understand now why Intel released the 510 series first. Right. They released it. I don't know if it's even actually been for sale yet, but they've definitely released it. With the reviews and all that, it was because they wanted to say, hey, look, we've got a SATA 6G solution for those people that are excited about that. I think what we probably need to do on this show is kind of, I think, educate people to the fact that most of the time that's not what's going to be most important. Right. That raw sequential read write, because that's only statistic and performance statistic you're going to see that's really, really different. between these two drives. So,
well, I mean, here's another thought, or another thing to throw out. Sorry, there's this really fantastic footrest down here, but I feel like every time I step on it, can anybody in the chat room hear this giant creaking when I step on it? Sorry, I just want to make sure there wasn't a giant howling creak every time I shifted over here. I feel very ergonometric, just squeaky. The point I was going to say is we should probably discuss whether or not we expect another round of consumer SSDs, another big round of consumer SSDs to show up between now and Christmas. It's not a bad time. It's not a bad time to be looking at SSD drives right now. Most of the majors have released the OCZ. The Vertex 3 is out. The Vertex 2 prices are down.
Right.
Intel's out swinging with some of their new products. It may be the heat here in Petaluma because I'm still not used to temperatures above 65 after 12 years in San Francisco. But it sounds like I feel like there's going to be at least one more major evolution in the drives before Christmas. No,
I'm not. I mean, Intel has kind of alluded to the fact that there are going to be other drives coming out for our markets pretty soon. I don't think we're going to have any real dramatic changes in things because if you look at it, we're maxing out the SATA 3.0 gigabit per second bus. We are able to put speeds of SATA 6G out there if we need to, if people need them. Those controllers exist. They're not great. Those can be improved upon, and that might happen before the end of the year. But the only other real important statistic is IOs per second and differences and all that kind of thing. I think the most dramatic change we'll see will be in complete systems, notebooks, and desktops where they figure out new, unique, better ways to combine SSDs of smaller capacity like 160 gig or 300 gig with larger capacity drives like 1 and 2 terabyte and above physical disks. Think of the hybrid hard drives, but things that actually work well and people like.
So it's safe to tell everybody out in the Twitch audience that if you have been pining for an SSD, if you've been saving your pennies, go ahead and buy an SSD and experience the revolution.
We can never be 100% confident, but this is one of those times where I think we're pretty safe at this point. It's always possible that some NAND flash thing is going to change and prices will drop, but I don't think performance-wise we'll see anything, and I don't expect big performance drops anytime soon. It's like anything sudden. It's always been slow, progressive drops in this space. It's not like the GPU market where all of a sudden a new drive comes out and everything just falls off a cliff in the previous generation. So, yeah, I would say not a bad time to do that.
Go forth and shop.
Right.
Don't tell Alan. Alan Malventano does the SSD reviews. We actually have Anand coming on Techzilla in a couple weeks to talk about some of the SSD benchmarks. And next, I swear I'm going to get Alan on. I will get that email.
You better. It'll hurt his feelings otherwise.
He built something really cool at work that I want him to talk about, but we need to figure out how he can talk about it without getting.
Yeah, I don't know how much he'll be able to. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you can't talk about what it's used for, but I think he can talk about the hardware. Anyhow, we should do one more thing before we take an ad break. If you've been reading about Samsung being evil Samsung has been putting keyloggers on their notebooks. No, actually, it turns out it's a bit of an oops. A company called GFI makes some high-end security software, and it turns out Alex Eckelberry, First Red News, reports on Wednesday, I'm quoting Computer World right now, that some of Samsung's R-series laptops contained keylogging software. He was as astounded as everybody else. He thought it was a great story. Eckelberry's the general manager of GFI Security. You may remember the Sony BMG rootkit problem back in 2005, which turned into a giant opportunity for Sony to pay a lot of people a bunch of money. It turns out the so-called keylogger was a false positive. In the security parlance, that means we made an oops. A false positive is when your security software tells you something benign is evil and trying to eat your face. Eckelberry said in an interview today, ComputerWorld.com says, "We've just fell on our sword on this. It's mud on our face." So, and Samsung did a big PR announcement that basically said this is a ridiculous claim. Actually, it's really understated even for a Korean technology company. The statements that Samsung installs keylogger on R525 and R540 laptop computers are false. Our findings indicate that the person mentioned in the article used a security program called Viper that mistook a folder created by Microsoft's Live application for a keylogging software during a virus scam. The confusion arose because Viper mistook Microsoft's Live application multi-language support folder, SL folder, as StarLogger. Samsung will continue to respect customer needs by providing the highest quality products and services. Which, oddly enough, reminds me of another Samsung product this week. So it's safe to buy Samsung notebooks. Samsung's not spying on you. Either that or this is like a nefarious level of evil above this. And Samsung is so evil that they paid off the security company to take the fall. I don't think so. I'm being humorous.
No,
Have you seen
I don't think so.
The transparent Samsung monitors?
Wait, say it again?
Samsung is releasing...
the ultra thin bezel stuff?
No. It's like transparent, like see-through monitors. I totally forgot about this until we started talking about Samsung.
Okay.
Samsung announced, I guess yesterday, that it was the first company to begin mass production of transparent LCD panels. 22-inch panels, 1680 by 1050, 501 contrast ratio, available in both color and black and white models. So this is starting to sound like an aesthetic piece rather than a serious work thing. Right. Samsung claims that the panels offer the world's highest transparency rate, over 20% for the black and white variety, 15% for color.
Can you tell me what the benefit of this is?
In a press release issued today, Samsung touts the panel's endless possibilities in the advertising world, suggesting they could be applied to show windows and outdoor billboards, or even used as an interactive communication device for businesses and schools. Like Samsung Electronics LCD Business Sector Vice President Youngwon Park said, transparent displays will have a wide range of use in all industry areas as an efficient tool for delivering information and communication. Basically, it's a monitor without a backlight, as near as I can tell. I thought it was kind of fascinating and strange and wonderful.
So it's transparent when it's off, or it's transparent when it allows itself to be transparent? It's kind of like...
Judging from the pictures I've seen, you can see, like, you sit it in... Like, there was a life hacker thing on how to make a transparent monitor a few weeks ago, and basically the transparent monitor was having a fairly short lens and doing a picture from the perspective of where you sit through the monitor. So what this seems to be... see-through computer screens that don't require power-sucking backlights to function. This is in Gadget before I was quoting PC Mag. No AOM, there's no LED yet, but ambient light-powered LCDs. So these are LCDs that use...
I see.
That use the light around you, whether it's sunshine or the fluorescent lights or the LED lights in the studio.
That's kind of cool. Okay.
I think it's safe to say that it's a curiosity. And apparently I'm the only person who's really fascinated by this. Moving on, perhaps we should thank one of our lovely sponsors who helps bring the show to you every week.
We should do that. This week, we're going to thank our friends at MailRoute. If you haven't heard of their service by now, you definitely need to. Businesses of any size, whether or not you're one user, 50,000 users, it doesn't really matter. MailRoute will protect you from spam and viruses, simplify your life, and make your email usable again. It's a secure hosted service that filters virus and spam for companies of any size. It can eliminate viruses and spam, reduce the load on your email servers, lower your costs, and make your email usable again. The typical MailRoute customers see a 95% reduction in their inbound email volume with virtually no false positives, the term that Patrick just defined for us earlier. So with the 95% reduction in inbound email volume, you might imagine you could have quite a few less servers powering that whole mess you might have there. Leo loves using MailRoute as well. He's been using the service for his domains for more than 6 years and has been his top choice for spam and virus filtering all along. Tom Merritt started using MailRoute, and now he can use email domains that he'd given up on as being hopeless. Tom Johnson was the founder he's the founder and CEO of MailRoute. Started one of the very first companies in this market back in '98 called FrontBridge. Was acquired by Microsoft in 2005, and is still offered today actually as a Microsoft Exchange hosted service. Tom wasn't done though. He had too many good ideas. He couldn't stand to see go to waste. So he started MailRoute, the next generation of email filtering with a level of accuracy and price unmatched by anybody else. There's nothing easier than filtering with MailRoute. This is the best part. There's no hardware or software to install on your local system. You just sign up with MailRoute and then change the MX records of your domain to point to MailRoute, and then the email immediately starts flowing back to your normal server. So if you know what an MX record is, if you have your own website and use your own email, I think this even works with Google Apps if you use Google Apps as well. You can give this a shot. Visit mailroute.info to sign up. As a Twit listener, you'll receive a 10% discount for the life of your account. Small business accounts start at just $2 per user per month for 10 users, and because of demand from the Twit Army, MailRoute has added a new service for individual users as well, less than $30 per person per year for those single users. Visit mailroute.info and sign up with the email filtering service that Tom and Leo use. And of course, we thank them for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. What do you say we jump into a couple emails? We've got you're actually building a home server project as well, right?
Yeah, I got really lucky in a weird way. Robert Heron bought an Asus motherboard, a P8H67-M Evo, and basically bought the wrong size. He wanted, I think, the mini ITX instead of the micro ATX.
Right.
So rather than take the 15 or 20% hit for returning it, he sold it to me. And so I'm going to be building a new server for the house. Maybe a little sort of a server / home theater PC. And I was laughing because I thought it was a good time to talk about, you don't need a 600 watt or an 800 watt power supply for a Core i3 or a Core i5 doing server duties.
Absolutely not.
It's interesting. Seasonics X Series just got a really, really good review up on Hard OCP. Kingwin's LZP, they do a 550 watt power supply. The smallest in capacity they've reviewed from Kingwin and advertised as being the most efficient power supply we have seen to date. And it was interesting where they basically said the first power supply that Hard OCP's reviewed that is advertised as being 80+ platinum certified. And not only was it platinum when it comes to efficiency, it was absolute bank across the board. And it sells for about $170. The only place I think you can find it is at Newegg. So... And I'm trying to figure out if I do a Core i3, can I get away? I mean, I'm actually kind of afraid to go to anything smaller than like 450 or 500 watts.
Well, we published a review of the Silverstone SFX 450 watt power supply just this month over at PC Perspective. Lee did our review of that. It sells for about $80, so it's pretty reasonably priced. It did get a silver award from us. The only kind of minor gripe he had about the unit was that the cables were a little bit short if used in a standard ATX case. But if you're going to use like a mini ATX case or something like that, it won't be an issue at all, I guess. But they reached, but they weren't necessarily, didn't give you extra length. If you had like one of those Corsair 600Ds or something like that where the cables go behind the motherboard and come back out, you might have had a couple of issues there. But it was, this one was... which was this? This was 80+ bronze, not quite as efficient, not up to the platinum level. But only talking about a few percentage points back and forth with that. 450 watt continuous DC output at 50C, 36 amps. Wow. Available on the 12-volt rail, so more than enough for any kind of home server type project you're doing there. He'd like, low AC ripple, good efficiency, active power factor control, that kind of stuff. So, and very quiet, he says too, during normal operations. Although we always jack up the power on it to make sure we get the full speed of those fans to make sure what they do. But under normal use cases, and for a unit that's going to be $80, that's pretty good. And you said the one that was platinum was like 170?
160 for the Kingwin. And
yeah.
I think the Seasonics, the Seasonics X Series 650 is probably way more than I need for a power supply. Go ahead.
If you're not using discrete graphics, or anything like that, or even if you're using discrete graphics that, aren't, $250 plus GPU, 450 watts is a lot more than people think, right?
Yes.
People are used to seeing 800, 900, 1,000 watt power supplies now, and I'm just as guilty of this. We use that on our test bed, but that's because we have to plan for worst case scenarios when we want to plug in 3 GTX 580s or something like that.
You're actually somebody who does plug in 3 graphics monitors, or like 3 GPUs plus 3 or 4 hard drives and a gigantic CPU. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I'm going to see. I'm going to spec out some parts. We can talk about it some more next week. But I'm kind of torn between going super cheap and doing a Core i3 or going with a Core i5 because the like idling the Core i5 chews like no power. I think Robert Harron, when we did a review of a Puget Systems box, one of their quiet PCs with a Core i5, and it was running something like 22 watts at idle. It was consuming like no power, and even at full throttle when it was rendering, the power consumption was super low. So
cool.
More on that next week.
Indeed.
Michael's got a question about PCI Express 3.0, DDR4, and the like. He says, what's up, guys? Love the show. I really want to get a new or old Sandy Bridge motherboard, but I hear rumblings of the new X68 and AM3 Plus lines coming out and think I should wait. Then I assume DDR4 is not out till later. SATA 3 is barely implemented, and I also wonder about PCI Express 3.0. How long should I wait? Should I wait until PCI Express 3.0? Will it make any difference with today's cards? It's probably a good time also to mention that Sandy Bridge is finally out on the mobile notebooks.
Right.
In my enthusiasm.
Yeah. We posted a little preview at PC Perspective that didn't really specify on any individual product, like it was an MSI notebook I think we used for the performance review. Just a quick overview of what the performance is. It's more of a reminder, refresher, since we kind of tested it back in January, but because it's been almost 3 months and products haven't been on sale since then, we thought it was a good idea to kind of take a look at that kind of stuff. I don't think this kind of came out of left field because I hadn't even heard rumblings of DDR4 from AMD or Intel at all.
Right.
In terms of main system memory. PCIe 3, excuse me, I've heard a little bit about from the PCI SIG at IDF and that type of stuff, but that's not, it's so far out of the consumer wheelhouse. PCI Express 2.0 is very rarely stretched today, right? And even graphics cards. Think about it this way: a by16 connection, and we take a by16 and split it into 2x8 connections for 2 graphics cards when you have SLN Crossfire. So obviously you don't need the full bandwidth of by16 even for the highest end modern GPUs today. So whatever speed benefits PCI Express 3.0 brings will not really benefit the consumer, I think, right away or any time in the near future, to be perfectly honest about it. And no, won't make a difference for graphics cards. It really won't. They're not doing anything. PCI Express 1.0 is still okay for most GPU applications. It's just nobody implements PCI Express 1.0 anymore. That's just an old technology. So, AM3 Plus. Do you want to wait for that? Maybe if you're going to go with an AMD system, those motherboards are getting very, 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 very close. And that will support current processors as well as the future Bulldozer processors. So I think if you want to build an AMD system, that's worth waiting. But DDR4, SATA 6G, that's everywhere now. PCIe 3, those aren't even on the table yet. If you wait for that, you're never going to build a system because they'll be talking about whatever's after that.
It's so funny when you look at with PCI Express or PCIe 3.0. You move from like gigabits per second to giga transfers per second. Because you're talking about backwards compatibility with earlier PCI Express devices, but it's a little kind of crazy to start realizing how much bandwidth. I just don't see that showing up anywhere other than servers, and probably like backplanes for servers, not even like in smaller.
It's for
boxes.
Servers to talk to other servers type of thing. I almost feel guilty though saying that this is not something to worry about because we just talked about how much bandwidth we need in the mobile, or in the internet connection speed. But this is, it's a totally different animal. I wouldn't worry about that at all, Michael. Let's see. We got an email from Jeff about expectations on a system based on the budget system at PC Perspective. He says, I built my current gaming machine in 2004 and have been limping along with it ever since. I didn't know about PCPer.com at the time, so I used some other PC building guide for the budget system. It was hardly top of the line even then, but the goal was to play Half-Life 2, and it did this okay. Now my son has come of age, and we need to get ready for Portal 2, which is a good plan there. I have too many kids to build anything but your budget system, but I'd like to get an idea of what I will be able to expect from it. For example, I would expect Portal 2 to perform much better than my old system did with Half-Life 2. I guess what I'd like to know is how good is the budget system? If you go over to pcper.com/hardware leaderboard, you'll see what these budget systems are. Yeah.
Super Complex leaderboard resolves to the hardware leaderboard.
Does it? Oh, good job. I didn't know how I did that.
I asked you to do that, actually.
Oh, that's right.
Because it used to have this really complicated URL. But the budget system on the leaderboard, the cost is $443, and we don't have any specifics from Matt. Excuse me, we don't have any specifics from Matt on what he's got for a CPU and a GPU.
No, he doesn't really say what the current setup is.
But yeah, you're talking about an Athlon 2 X64 635, which actually you've kind of bumped up to an Athlon X4 645. Gigabyte GA770T USB 3, a Sapphire 100287L, which is an HD 5760. It's an $80 card.
Right.
4 gigabytes of RAM, which is more than enough for most gaming applications. That's a really nice spec out there, and plus you've got at this point you're getting a terabyte hard drives for $60.
Yep. And the total system, the total price of $443 is pretty cheap. I mean, that's really, really, really pretty good to be able to build a whole system. We don't count the case and your optical drive and that kind of stuff. But I think this is going to have no problems playing Portal 2. Right. It's an HD 5670. It's not the fastest graphics card in the world. I'm going to assume he's running on a 1680 by 1050 monitor, something like that. If that's the case, Portal 1 wasn't hard on systems at all. Portal 2, from what we've seen, doesn't look particularly different than that. And it's definitely going to play it better than any system you built in 2004, especially if you're saying you built a budget system in 2004. If 7 years is a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten 5 years out of a $500, budget gaming PC, but I can't. I'll get about maybe 18 months into it, and something will get upgraded, either the hard drive or more memory. Right. The parts prices generally drop down. If you genuinely have a 7-year-old system or even a 5-year-old system, the initial boot on this system is going to make you sort of, you're going to get you're going to have this sort of like, oh my God, it's so fast.
Right.
Because it's, if you wait a couple generations on a chip before you upgrade, the comparative speed, you upgrade a processor every year, it's like you're lucky if you see like a 20-25% difference in most cases. Lucky, and that's if you're spending at the high end. And you wait 5 years and a couple architectures between hardware upgrades, you're going to feel really good about the money you spent. You're going to be like, oh my goodness, this is so fast. I think you will be shocked and amazed and delighted and lots of other excited and happy thoughts with that one.
Agreed.
So, and then get Steam for everyone in the family. Matt's got a question about home theater PC recording. He says, on the last episode, you guys had a question about whether or not a particular CPU could handle recording more than one show at a time. In the, tiltsarchive.org/archive/mythcast_episode 25.og episode of Myth TV Cast. The guys interviewed Jeremy Hammer from Ceton Corp, makers of the lovely Infinity V4 cable card tuner. The way Jeremy says that the Ceton card works is that the computer identifies the incoming streams as files on a network share. All the decoding and transcoding is done on the card, and the only thing the recording computer has to worry about is writing the files to its hard drive. I've been a Myth TV user for about 7 years. I love my Lin HES box and all the powers it gives me. I understand that it's not for everyone, being that it is Linux. It always takes a little more effort to get it to do everything. I've felt that pain. But the results are fantastic. I just had my braces adjusted earlier today because I broke a brace off.
Doing it early.
Yeah, well, they also tightened everything up, which is kind of like, I walked out of the orthodontist office and pounded a fistful of Advil. Actually, for the younger folks in the audience, I took a responsible and correct dosage of Advil, erring towards the minimum possible dosage to reduce the pain and or swelling and discomfort from my orthodontics. Remember, Ryan and I believe in responsible self-care. And the Lin HES, if you don't know it, is what people are calling sort of the sort of Linux, gosh, I want to say Linux home entertainment system. I always forget.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah, the Linux home entertainment system.
It's interesting. We got several emails kind of on this subject about our discussion last week, because basically the question was, will the Fusion processor be a good enough processor to record these incoming streams? Multiple people say that their Atom-based system or really low-end system had no problems at all handling the video streams coming in from these multi-stream cable cards like the Ceton cards, which was a little bit surprised to me that much of the work would be offloaded from the CPU onto the card itself. But we've had multiple reports, and I'm talking 5 or 6 emails, so 5 or 6 people who are listening and actually taking the time to writing in. Seems to be a pretty good percentile there.
I wouldn't want to use it as a home theater PC if I was trying to feed a 10. I wouldn't want to use any of the lower end processors as a home theater PC.
Yeah, I agree.
1080p, but
even though it might be possible to record all that with this, I'm thinking it's probably not. I don't know. I still don't think that it's ideal. And if you can get away spending a couple of $100 extra to get that better performance, now you can do playback and recording at the same time and not have to worry about stuff. But if you've got a rig that's already sitting there and you're worried about it, this is one of my typical responses is if you're debating, do I build a new system to put the Ceton card in, or do I put the Ceton card in this existing system? It's always better. You're going to buy it. You're going to buy that component anyway. Buy it, put it in your rig, see if you like it. If it does, great. You saved a bunch of money. If it doesn't, you're not out of anything but a little bit of time. So now you could build a whole new system around it, that type of thing.
Definitely got to say thanks to Matt for the heads up on that one. And it's funny, even on cetoncorp.com, if you go to the requirements for the Infinity V4, they're basically saying minimum specs at 2 gigahertz or faster CPU, 32 or 64-bit OS, 2.7 gigahertz or faster dual-core CPU is recommended. 3 gigabytes of RAM is recommended. It'll run with 2 gigabytes of RAM, single PCI Express slots. I am fascinated that it happily runs the lower end processors.
Yeah,
I wouldn't like to do it myself.
I agree. Minimums are, to me, minimums are if you've got a brand new operating system, maybe like a fresh install, no other applications running, nothing else going on. These are the bare minimum requirements. It doesn't take into account anything else you're going to want to be doing, and your multitasking machine here is going to be doing other stuff, more than likely. So, we got an email from Lee about large backups. He says, I'm looking for the most cost-effective solution for backing up my Drobo. I have almost 2 terabytes of home movies and large pictures. Obviously, a cloud backup solution like Carbonite will not work, as his Comcast service has a 250 gigabyte bandwidth cap. So what would you recommend is the safest and cheapest way to back up this data off-site? When I first read this, I read that first line, cost-effective way to back up my Drobo, and I was like, well, why do you need to back up a Drobo? That's the whole point of a Drobo. And then he mentions the off-site thing, and I remembered.
I remember Japan
favorite thing to do.
All of a sudden, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Patrick's always saying off-site, off-site, off-site.
It's funny. Drobo actually came out with a service and a product primarily for small businesses that have more than one offices that will allow the Drobos to synchronize with each other at different locations automatically in the background.
Yeah.
And it's Veronica and I have been playing around looking for kind of the best. What we're trying to decide what is Tekzilla's preferred online backup solution going to be. Carbonite, they're solid, they're there, they offer discounts, they also sponsor us. There's a couple other ones that look really good. Crash Plan's really tempting. But the problem is, and we were talking about this on Tekzilla a couple weeks ago, and like Lee brought it up here, is if you got a 250 gigabyte monthly cap, that is a total bandwidth cap that includes upload and download. So in addition to that is most of the online backup vendors are going to, after a certain amount of data has gone up to their servers, they will throttle you. So you can kind of be patient and slowly upload this stuff in the background. You can do what a friend of mine does, which is take his Drobo into the office and take advantage of the relatively uncapped high-speed internet in his office. That may or may not be illegal or unadvisable, depending on what business you're in and what kind of office you work in. One of the things Robert Harridan and I have done where we have, we do disk swap, where all the data goes onto the disk and gets handed over because, he lives further inland, higher above the sea, and in an apartment building it's built on stone instead of being built on landfill like the Craftsman I live in is. So his house is anything that destroys his house probably won't destroy my house. I'm going to knock on Leo's desk now since I've probably just doomed both San Leandro and Alameda. Hubris. but it's huge amounts of data. Something actually we're talking about on Techzilla this week is we found a way to get around the Comcast cap if you're willing to change the type of service you have. I'm going to make everybody watch Techzilla to find that one out. But it's tough because when you start getting up into terabytes of data, you're talking about either taking months to upload it because you know what I mean. 2 terabytes of data is 4 months of your bandwidth cap,
right?
If you don't do anything else with your internet connection.
Now there are other my cable service does not have bandwidth caps, so I didn't have any problems using Carbonite. Now I backed up not quite terabytes of data. I think right now we have about 450 gigs worth of stuff backed up, and it did that first. I mean that first thing took many weeks. I think we're talking like 6 weeks or something like that because upload speeds just do that. Not all the country has those, and you would hope. I mean, Kansas City, they won't have to worry about that, right? So, but yeah, it's
as long as nothing happens to your house or your data between now and 2012 when you start turning it on. Yeah, I mean, look, there are issues with storing data on raw hard drives long term. In theory, it's a charge on the surface of a platter, and if it's not sort of massaged over time, something like an XFS operating system on a FreeNAS box or a Drobo box or any of a number of other high-end devices, they kind of what they call polishing your data. If you take a hard drive, take the energy out of it, don't write to it or read from it or correct it, and sit it in a drawer for a number of years, at some point, in theory, the charges are going to dissipate on the surface of the disk. So that's a little paranoid making. Blu-rays are too expensive for most of us to back up large amounts of data, and it's still only like, 50 gigabytes max, unless you get one of the super high-end specialized ones that are impossible to buy and only seen at NAB and certain CES shows, and cost like $250 a pop. It's,
nice.
When you start getting into terabytes of data, things start getting complicated. The cheapest thing to do is to kind of like, especially if you've got a Drobo, you could, get a second Drobo, copy everything over to that. You could, do hard drive swap with friends. You could be very patient and back. The simplest thing to do is just use one of your, basically take 3 months to back everything up. Temporarily back everything off to a few hard drives so that you've got a copy stored at the office or your friend's house, or send it to your mom or whatever in a very well-wrapped package, preferably in static-proof bags. And spend the next few months quietly uploading your data to the cloud in the meantime. I want to say Amazon S3 maybe offers one of those deals where you can FedEx your disks to the mothership and they will upload locally. But I remember that being prohibitively expensive for a consumer. Maybe not so prohibitively expensive for a business. Must invest.
Nice. I think let's see. We got one more email for Mark. If you want to take that.
Yeah. Mark says, motherboard posting last week. Hi, guys. In episode 112, Tristan asked about filling all of his RAM slots in his system not posting. I can confirm that I had a very similar situation on a Gigabyte X48 -DS4 motherboard and 8 gigs of OCZ RAM. When all 4 slots were filled, it would not reach post 90% of the time. That sucks, dude. If it did boot at all, it would never wake from S3 sleep. That sucks even worse. The added fun was Gigabyte's dual BIOS. The added fun with Gigabyte's dual BIOS was that you could get into an endless reboot loop of death as it switched from BIOS to BIOS. Oh, no. Like Tristan, if only 1 or 2 slots were used, all is fine. After a lot of faffing about, I found boosting the DDR2 overvoltage control in the BIOS by plus 0.30 volts allowed it to boot, and it's been rock solid, sleep and all, ever since.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I am vindicated.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, 0.3 of a volt is a lot.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. As with all overclocking stuff, you need to make sure you're a little bit careful with that.
When you
kind
say
of
a
thing.
lot, is that like fry the memory a lot, or just an unusually high amount of voltage?
It's an unusually high amount of voltage. I might even try 1/10 of a volt or 2/10 of a volt first before you just jump up to 30 or 3/10, because I mean, if you're taking memory from 1.65 to 1.95 or whatever it happens to be, it could cause other stability problems down the road, or if this memory has heat sinks on it. If you've got a properly cooled chassis, it's probably not going to be an issue for you. But I would say overvoltage in the DDR2 is a good idea. But you don't necessarily have to start at 0.3 if you don't want to. If you've got high quality memory and you're fine with that, it's probably not going to be an issue. But maybe try lower first, and if you continue to have the issue in a couple of weeks,
it never
or
hurts
if you continue to have the issue
to ease it up.
Yes.
Should we do the Twitter from Sonic Pet 07 real quick?
Sure, yeah.
He says, I have a GTX 470. If I were to get a second card for SLI and or a third display, does it have to be another 470? Are there options?
If you want to do SLI, it has to be another 470.
Right.
If you want just to have a third display, it can be any graphics card you want, NVIDIA or AMD, as long as you're running Windows 7. If you're running Windows 7, you can have both an AMD and NVIDIA card in the same system at the same time. If you're using Vista or XP, you cannot. Or maybe XP you can. I don't know. It's been a while. Everybody should be using 7. Yes. So you could use anything. You could get a really inexpensive card for that third display. But if you want the option of doing SLI or 3 displays, you do have to have a GTX 470. That is one of the crutches, I guess, of SLI versus Crossfire. So there you go. If you want to send in emails to us for future episodes, we highly encourage you to do so. The email address is twich, TWICH, at twit.tv. That goes to both Patrick and I, so we'll be sure to filter through those, find some wonderful questions to answer. Also, you can follow us on Twitter. He is at Patrick Norton, and I am at Ryan Shrout, and we will oftentimes solicit questions from that area of the internets as well. You can find me at PC Perspective, PCPer.com, hardware reviews, that kind of stuff. Processors, notebooks. This right up now this week we've got PC Power and Cooling 760 watt power supply, the Intel 320 series SSD review, and even we took a look at the Corsair Gaming Audio HS1A headphones. These are the analog plugs rather than the USB versions that we had tested in previous episodes. What's going on over at Techzilla or HD Nation, which is where you can find Patrick
with Veronica Belmont and Robert Heron. Oh boy, we did a really good hands-on on how to upgrade your hard drive in your notebook or your desktop. They kind of work the same way, and some free software you can use to do that. We got the whole, just went up today, how to get around Comcast data cap, and we got a Pelican case in for testing, a 1510, the LLC, their laptop, and I figured out how to break the notebook inside that. Hint, launching it like 15, 18 feet in the air on the concrete, perfectly safe. Sledgehammers, however, I learned something about Pelican cases.
And sledgehammers, gotcha.
Yeah. Let's just say it is I still have total faith in Pelican cases, but having an 8-pound sledge beat your luggage to death is probably a highly unlikely scenario for a piece of luggage designed to be carried on the airplane with you.
I agree.
Just saying. I think that's going to be it for this episode of Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.